Maya stands in line at the bank, holding a folder with documents she barely understands, watching the digital number above the counter change slowly. And she notices how everyone around her looks slightly impatient, slightly distracted, as if this place exists outside of real life, a pause between more important moments. And she realizes that lately most of her days feel like this, like waiting rooms, spaces between things that never quite arrive. And she thinks about how she used to believe adulthood would feel more intentional, more directed, that she would wake up knowing exactly why she was doing what she was doing. But instead, she often feels like she is simply responding to life rather than choosing it, answering emails, paying bills, agreeing to plans she doesn't care about, avoiding conversations she doesn't know how to start. And as she steps forward when her number is called, she feels a subtle resistance inside, not toward the bank or the paperwork, but toward the sense that her own life has become a series of administrative tasks, things that maintain existence without actually enriching it. And while the clerk explains something about forms and signatures, Maya nods automatically, not really listening, because her attention drifts to the thought that she can't remember the last time she felt genuinely excited about a regular day, not a vacation or a special event, just an ordinary morning that felt meaningful on its own. And this realization doesn't make her sad, it makes her strangely alert, like she's been slightly asleep for years and is only now noticing it. And she wonders when she stopped asking herself real questions, when she decided that stability was enough, that being functional was the same as being fulfilled. And she signs the last paper and steps back outside into the noise of the street, feeling the city move around her at full speed while something inside her remains suspended, aware that nothing is technically wrong with her life, no crisis, no disaster, just a growing sense that she has been living on autopilot, carefully managing a version of herself that works well in systems but rarely checks in with what she actually feels, wants, or needs. Maya walks home from the bank with the folder still tucked under her arm, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk, and she notices how automatic her movements feel, her feet carrying her forward without real awareness, like she's moving through a routine she barely questions. And as she opens the door to her apartment, the familiar smell of laundry and faint coffee lingers, and she realizes how little she actually notices these small things until she pauses. How much of her life has been spent on autopilot, simply responding to circumstances rather than actively inhabiting them. And she sets the folder on the kitchen counter without unpacking it, leans against the doorway, and for a moment just breathes, aware of the silence of the apartment, which feels less like peace and more like absence. And she thinks about how her friendships have slowly followed the same pattern, interactions reduced to brief check-ins, polite messages, dinners scheduled for convenience, emotional depth carefully avoided. And she wonders when she started accepting this version of normal, when she stopped noticing the difference between being present and merely existing. And as she makes herself a cup of tea, she patches her reflection in the window, the faint streetlights behind her, and it strikes her how neutral her expression is, how practiced the calm, how much energy has gone into appearing composed while her inner world quietly contracts. And she recognizes that this constant internal editing, this careful maintenance of herself, has made life predictable but hollow, functional but unremarkable. And as she sits at the small table sipping the tea, feeling the warmth slowly spread through her hands, she notices a soft tension in her chest, not dramatic, not urgent, but persistent. The awareness that she is capable of more, of feeling more, of noticing more, and that simply continuing to live as she has, efficient, polite, emotionally cautious, will gradually erode the subtle richness that remains. And this recognition is neither despair nor hope, only quiet clarity, a gentle but undeniable invitation to pay attention, to question, to feel, and to notice herself moving through each ordinary day with a presence she has too long neglected. That evening, Maya sits on her small balcony with a cup of tea she barely sips, the city lights flickering below like tiny, indifferent stars. And she notices how the sounds of life, cars, distant conversations, a dog barking somewhere, feel almost unreal, like she is observing them through a pane of glass, present in body but slightly absent in mind. And she reflects on how long she has been moving through days this way, reacting to obligations, performing the routines of adulthood, while her own desires, curiosities, and small excitements have quietly faded into background noise. And she remembers the last time she felt truly excited for something ordinary, like a new book, a spontaneous invitation, a weekend without plans, and realizes she cannot, at this moment, name one such occasion in recent months. And this recognition feels neither dramatic nor catastrophic, but subtly alarming, the kind of awareness that creeps into the chest and lingers, insisting on attention. And as she leans back in her chair and watches a young couple laugh as they cross the street, she feels a quiet mix of longing and resignation, noticing how effortless their connection seems, how spontaneous, and how much energy she herself has devoted to keeping everything neat, scheduled, controlled, safe, and unremarkable. And she wonders if she has mistaken safety for contentment, control for freedom, predictability for life. And in that moment, sipping the cooling tea, Maya understands that change will not arrive from external events, from a new job, a new friend, or a sudden opportunity, but from something far more subtle and difficult, the willingness to notice her own internal life again, to sit with discomfort, to allow curiosity, to take risks in small, quiet ways. And she realizes that simply beginning to pay attention, to truly inhabit her own days, is the first step toward reclaiming a life that has long been lived in neutral, almost invisible, but no longer entirely unnoticed. Later that night, Maya sits at her kitchen table with a half-empty cup of tea, the apartment dimly lit by the single lamp she never turns off completely. And she feels the weight of silence pressing in, not oppressive but persistent, making it impossible to ignore the quiet rhythm of her own thoughts, the small repetitive worries, the endless lists of tasks she completes without questioning whether they matter. And she notices how automatic her evenings have become, evenings where she moves from dinner to email to scrolling on her phone, always busy, always productive, yet rarely touched by genuine feeling. And she thinks about how she once used to imagine her life differently, full of small adventures, meaningful conversations, laughter that lingered, moments that felt alive rather than simply endured. And she realizes that those visions didn't disappear in a dramatic way. They faded gradually, replaced by routines, obligations, and the constant pursuit of stability. And she wonders when she stopped noticing that her own presence in life was optional, that she could go through the motions perfectly while her emotions quietly withdrew. And as she leans back in her chair, staring at the soft glow of the lamp reflecting on the kitchen walls, she becomes aware of the subtle emptiness, the small but undeniable distance between what her life looks like and what it feels like. And she recognizes that the most difficult part of reclaiming herself will not be changing her environment, her work, or her relationships, but relearning to inhabit her own interior world, to allow feelings to rise without judgment, to pause long enough to notice what matters, to feel both discomfort and small pleasures fully. And as she closes her eyes for a moment, she senses the quiet invitation of this awareness, the possibility that paying attention might be the only way to transform routine into experience, and that even small shifts in presence could gradually restore the richness that has been missing from her life for so long. The next morning, Maya wakes up to the soft gray light of early dawn slipping through her blinds, and she lies for a few minutes listening to the distant sounds of the city, the hum of traffic, the faint chatter of neighbors, realizing how accustomed she has become to observing life rather than participating in it. And as she swings her legs over the side of the bed and touches the cold floor, she feels that familiar sense of routine carrying her forward automatically, brushing her teeth, showering, dressing without really noticing. And she thinks about how much of her life has become a collection of mechanical motions, small successes, tasks completed, errands run, and yet very little that truly registers as lived, remembered, or meaningful. And as she makes her way to the kitchen, pouring coffee with practiced precision, she notices the faint aroma and allows herself a moment to breathe. A small reminder that even in habitual life, sensory details can anchor presence if she chooses to notice them. And she reflects on the last conversation she had that truly mattered, one that left her thinking, laughing, or unsettled afterward. And she realizes she cannot recall it clearly, only fragments, suggesting that human connection, the very thing that once made days feel alive, has slowly receded into convenience and politeness. And as she sips her coffee, she recognizes a quiet fear rising within her, not of failure, not of loneliness, but of living too long in this state, of settling into a life that looks normal, acceptable, functional, while internally she remains a spectator, watching days pass without really inhabiting them. And she understands that change will not require dramatic gestures, only the small, persistent choice to notice, to pause, to speak when she feels something, to seek presence even in ordinary routines. And that the first step will be simply acknowledging the distance she has let grow between herself and her life, and holding that awareness without judgment, allowing it to guide her, gently, towards something she has not felt in years, truly living each day with awareness of herself inside it. On her way to work, Maya walks through the familiar streets with her bag slung over her shoulder, noticing the way the morning light catches on the glass of storefronts, how the air carries a mix of coffee, exhaust, and damp concrete, and she realizes how little she ever stops to observe these ordinary details, moving quickly through her life as though the world exists only as a backdrop for tasks and responsibilities. And she reflects on how her own mornings have become a ritual of efficiency, brushing past strangers, checking messages, mentally reviewing her schedule, responding to obligations before curiosity. And she wonders when she stopped noticing the textures of life, the small moments that once made days feel vivid, how conversations once carried unpredictability and laughter, how the decision to pause, to linger, to let herself feel a little more deeply has been quietly surrendered in exchange for routine and control. And as she waits for the train, watching the cars glide into the station with their passengers already absorbed in phones or papers, she feels a subtle tension in her chest, a quiet ache of absence, not dramatic, just persistent, a reminder that even in her carefully ordered life, something essential has been missing. And she notices how easy it is to drift, how automatic movement and thought have become, and she thinks about her friendships, once spontaneous, now polite exchanges, her evenings, once filled with exploration and conversation, now quiet and solitary. And the realization settles that nothing external has gone wrong. Her job is stable, her apartment comfortable, her days predictable. But internally, she has been absent, allowing life to pass by without emotional participation. And as the train arrives, she steps inside and grips the pole, feeling the motion beneath her feet. And she makes a quiet promise to herself, not loud or dramatic, only internal, to begin noticing, to pause, to inhabit her own experience again, even if it is uncomfortable, and to allow small awakenings of attention to slowly reclaim the vividness she has neglected for too long.
That evening, after a long day of work that felt both productive and strangely hollow, Maya returns to her apartment and sets her bag down by the door, noticing how quiet everything is. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, the distant traffic outside, and she feels a subtle awareness of how these sounds, once background, now highlight the stillness of her own presence. And she thinks about how much of her life has been lived in similar quiet states, performing tasks, attending meetings, replying to messages, all without truly feeling present in any moment. And she pours herself a glass of water, noticing the coolness on her fingertips, the faint clink of the glass on the counter, and allows herself a moment to breathe, aware that she has long neglected small sensory experiences that connect her to life. And she recalls the last conversation that left her feeling genuinely engaged, not polite or necessary, but alive, the way laughter and emotion ripple through moments. And she realizes she cannot easily remember it, only fragments. And this absence makes her feel a quiet longing, a soft, persistent ache for presence, for connection, for life that is experienced fully, not merely navigated. And she sits on the couch, leaning back, reflecting on how easy it has been to substitute routines for meaning, order for emotional richness, and predictability for engagement. And she understands that the real work ahead is not external, finding a new job, meeting new people, changing her surroundings, but internal, a gradual, patient process of noticing, feeling, responding authentically, and allowing herself to inhabit her own days with awareness, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it challenges the structures she has built to feel safe. And she realizes that this process is not dramatic, not immediate, but cumulative, requiring daily attention. And as she stares out the window at the faint city lights, she senses a quiet possibility stirring within her. The soft recognition that life, if truly noticed, can feel present again, even within the ordinary, even within herself. That night, Maya sits on the floor of her apartment with her back against the couch, a notebook open in front of her, its pages blank except for a few tentative lines. And she notices the weight of the day settling into her shoulders, a mixture of fatigue, awareness, and a strange kind of alertness she hasn't felt in years. And she reflects on the routine she has lived for so long, the hours filled with tasks, obligations, careful planning, polite exchanges, all perfectly functional but increasingly devoid of emotional texture. And she realizes how much of her life she has observed rather than participated in, moving through moments without noticing them, responding automatically, avoiding discomfort. And this realization does not bring panic or despair, only quiet clarity, like a soft light illuminating patterns she can no longer ignore. And as she uncaps a pen, she allows herself to write the first honest thought that comes to mind, not edited, not polished, just hers. And she notices how liberating it feels to make a mark without expectation, to acknowledge her own inner world without judgment. And she thinks about all the small moments she has missed, the conversations, the laughter, the spontaneous choices. And for the first time, she feels a subtle shift, a recognition that change will not arrive from dramatic gestures or external circumstances, but from the steady practice of noticing, of participating, of inhabiting her own life fully, even in ordinary routines, even in quiet, unremarkable moments. And as the city hums outside her window and the soft glow of her lamp warms the room, Maya feels a fragile but undeniable sense of presence, the understanding that she has begun to reclaim herself, not through action or performance, but simply by paying attention, by allowing herself to feel, to observe, and to exist within the full spectrum of her own experience. And in that stillness, she realizes that life is not something to manage, control, or endure, but something to inhabit slowly, carefully, consciously, one moment at a time.